Hello and welcome back to the Severe Weather Forecast Network. I am your host, Paul Thomason, and we are going to go over a severe weather outlook today because this is actually a really horrible setup that looks like is going to go on today across the Missouri line into Illinois, primarily that area around the noon to 3 o'clock area, that time frame. That's kind of when these cells are really going to go up and become extreme. Then eventually the cells kind of merge into a big huge squall line full of isolated discrete cells, or embedded cells rather, if you will. So we're going to go over that. But first, the categorical look here. You can see all these slants and hatched in areas here, as well as the moderate risk going from Missouri into Illinois. Pretty serious setup. It's really not a light day for severe weather across the Midwest region into the Ohio Valley. All of these areas, even in the marginal risk, you could see some severe weather that could do damage to life and property. There's all kinds of possibilities today, unfortunately. The other thing here, I haven't checked the NATO cast, but I was going to, but let's just run right into the models. Alright, so right now we're looking at the pre-noon kind of time frame here, and you can see this line of cells right here. Not expecting too much extreme to be going on with that until about 19Z here, and then you start to see these kind of bigger cells that are kind of popping up down here on the southwest region of that. Alright, so I did get a sounding off of this earlier that just kind of blew my mind, because I've been working with severe weather, doing forecasting and whatnot for 16 years, and some of the indices today that I'm seeing in some of the sounding data today is some of the highest that I've ever seen. And I'm talking about effective inflow levels up to 9.0. I'm seeing CIN, significant tornado parameter, up to 8, which is just kind of unheard of, really. Anything over 1.0, usually with significant tornado parameter, you could have the possibility of tornadoes, and we're talking about 8.9 in some of these areas. So if I pop the sounding data here, as it's just kind of getting going, you can see the supercell development on all these models is just like, wow, way up. You know what I mean? So there's so much spin and rotation going on in the atmosphere right now because of how low the pressure is. Then you got southern advection that's just kind of rushing into that line. You got some hail threat in here as well through most of these soundings as well. So a lot of these storms are going to be dropping some damaging hail. So right now at the 19Z hour, just kind of getting going. But watch what happens an hour later. We're just talking about 1 hour. Okay, and then these cells start to build, and then you start getting soundings that say marginal tornado risk, and that's probably because some of the pre-development that's going on, but at the same time, some of the indices are usually what we see in typical bad severe weather situations. You know what I mean? And that's not the case today. Our helicity and effective inflow is already up at 2. You know what I mean? 2 to 3 on our significant tornado parameters. You already got a pretty nice hooking structure here in the Howdo. You know what I mean? So it's already looking bad just an hour later. Alright, so now let's go to the 3 o'clock hour. And this is where we get into the really interesting stuff, because just an hour later after that, about the 3 o'clock, 3 p.m. hour, you start to see these big, huge, fat cells kind of developing. These are all basically isolated discrete cells that are kind of, they're going to be kind of feeding off of each other. They're going to be kind of fighting for energy and power for a little bit. But some of these big guys here are whipping out PDS TOR situations and soundings like I've never seen before. I mean, usually, 4.3, that's bad for any kind of tornado setup as far as effective inflow, helicity, surface helicity, and things like that. That's pretty bad already in itself. Supercell development is like through the roof. Significant tornado parameters really high. Ship is on the rise there with Actually, the ship really is the only thing that's really being consistent with this. This indicates how much, how likely it is for hail. This indicates hail. So that's really the only thing that's kind of being consistent throughout the entire storm, um, which basically definitely means that you're going to have hail. You know what I mean? Possibly even up to 2-inch diameter hail. Some of that being gorilla size. You know what I mean? With some of the big severe storms. Our Cape is just like insane high, you know what I mean, with 21 to 2400 levels. All right, and all the hydrographs are showing really organized hooking structures. Okay, so let's go to 2200Z, and then you start to see this kind of extended line that's going off to the south. Well, actually, from your angle, the extended line going off to the southwest right here. So this is going to be a big problem because when we go into our temperature and wind barbs, let's take a look at that. And I know this looks like a friggin' mess right now. All right, but basically the low pressure system is right here because you can see where the wind is coming from. So you can see the westerlies dumping into it here. Actually, you know what? Let me do the dew point because maybe it'll light it up a little bit better for you. So let's do dew point and wind barbs. Alright, so you can see this big huge plume of moisture that's going on up here, and you can see the wind barbs coming up from the south, and the low pressure system is right here where you see this jumbling in the wind. So you see these northerly winds, and you see these westerly winds. This line right here, that's kind of the front. That's going to be that squall line. All right, and the low pressure system's right here. So the big problem is that you can see that big plume of moisture just dumping right into that area right there with southern winds. Those southern winds kind of directing that moisture up in there, directing the heat up in there, and it gets caught in that low pressure system, meets with the westerlies, which you can see right here. You can see from this kind of tearing off with the moisture right here and these westerlies coming in. They're just colliding like a car accident. And that's causing a massive increase in supercell development rotation. Alright, so that's kind of what's going on right here. But you can see the temperatures right here in the 80s with massive dew points in excess of 70s. Alright, so you're getting that hot rainforest jungle kind of feeling right now in that area where it's just uncomfortably warm, uncomfortably moist. And for people who live in the Missouri region and the Illinois region who are used to having tornadoes from time to time in the springtime, they know what that feeling feels like. And so storm anxiety just rises in all these people because it's just a very unsettling feeling. And that's kind of what is going on right now, as is in anticipation for this storm system to come. All right, but all of these cells right here that are kind of next to each other, kind of going through a power battle, but they're not going through a power battle to the point where it's going to deplete their ability to produce. Because some of these storms, even in the forecast models, their structure is really decent. You can see even on this bottom one here that you can see a little bit of a little bevel in there, which would indicate some inflow notching. Alright, so that's kind of what I'm talking about. And if I hit that sounding right just to the southeast of it, then you're getting massive sounding readings like this. So the effective inflow at 6, and the helicity at 6.3. These are really, really high indices. These are really high readings. 22.1 in the supercell development. And that's kind of what I was talking about. That southern infection just dumping in there with heat and moisture and then crashing into the westerlies, and it's just causing massive rotation. So this is definitely a day where rotation in any of these storms is going to be extremely easy. Alright, so I don't know where I hit that sounding of like 9.0 on the inflow, but it was terrible. Now my assumption here is that these cells that are going to be further west and southwest of that initial line right there, that initial blob of isolated discrete cells, you're probably going to see worse indices actually off of those. Not right now. Look at our cape right here. It's surface cape at 4,867 joules of cape. That is a lot of instability. A lot of instability. All right, and effective inflow and helicity in the 5 region, all of these ingredients are kind of coming together nicely to develop some really, really beefy storms. All right, so 23Z hour. All right, we're looking up into the later afternoon and into the evening hours, about 5 o'clock. All right, so you start to see these. There's just isolated discrete cells everywhere, and as a forecaster, it's a nightmare because there's so many cells to look at, so many to track. You really don't know how. You know what I mean? It's all going to happen. All right. But you start to see these soundings like this with these storms, and they're all kind of feeding off of each other. What I mean by that, by the way, is that when you have all these cells next to each other, all these discrete cells that are clumped up in groups, usually the stronger ones will actually absorb energy from the other smaller storms around it. They start to merge, they start to absorb, and anytime that a storm does that, especially a tornadic storm, it does this building thing where it's getting ready to drop a tornado, and then it merges with another storm because it absorbs its helicity, its power, its energy. It absorbs it into the storm, and then its organization just gets crumbled and it has to start all over again. It has to reorganize all over again. So you're going to see this constant system of reorganizing today with all of these storms, all these isolated storms that are clumped together, and then just absorbing each other, reorganizing, reproducing, disbanding, then reorganizing, absorbing again. You know what I mean? It's just like a constant consecutive process that's going to be going on, and that's a lot of what I see today, especially when you see soundings like this, because even in this, for a day like this, especially with the storms that I've been seeing, this is actually a little bit on the lower scale as far as a tornado sounding today. This is lower than what it's been producing through most of this forecast. Alright, so this is what I was talking about. This sounding here is probably one of the most horrible soundings that I've ever seen in my life. I've never really seen some of these indices this high. EHI is our helicity, our storm helicity. Alright, effective inflow is at 8.3, which is ridiculous. It's just, I've never really seen it that high. Surface 3 kilometer helicity at 8.5. I've never seen that high. And our CAPE is up in the 2,500 joule range to 3,000 range. I mean, I've seen tornadoes show up at 500 joule CAPE, regions. And so this is a really, really unstable environment already, as it is. The hydrograph is putting out this big, huge, wide hooking structure, which a lot of times, I hate to say it, but I think that that's substantial. And, a lot of wedge tornadoes come out with HOTAs like this. You know what I mean? And I hate to say that. Big, fat wedge tornadoes a lot of times come out with big hydrographs like this. And it doesn't happen every time. You know what I mean? It's case-by-case basis. Hopefully, knock on wood, that won't happen today, but it doesn't look like it's going to be that kind of a day. It looks like this is extremely favorable. Supercell development is at 32. I have seen the supercell development that high before. You know what I mean? But usually with lower helicity limits, lower inflow indices. And our STP here, significant tornado parameter CIN, I usually go off of the CIN a little bit more than the fixed because I tend to think that it's a little bit more accurate, especially in the high resolution models. You know what I mean? So CIN right now is reading 9.6, which is unbelievably staggeringly high. I've never really seen the CIN reach 9.6 before. That's pretty bad. That's about as bad as it can get right there, as far as tornado indices. And the effective layer here, STP reading, I usually don't always trust because this is kind of a general understanding of what could be possible. But when I see PDS TOR hazard types coming out with effective layers up there reaching the 10 range, you know what I mean? This is kind of one of those days where you start to get jittery, especially as a storm chaser. You start to get jittery because you don't know what you're going to experience that day. because readings and soundings like this, when you understand soundings and meteorology this way, as a storm chaser, you understand when you get out on the road, there's a very good chance that you could have very, very high levels. Like this tornado here, if it drops, could be a very strong EF4, possibly an EF5. I'm not going to say that this isn't a day where an EF5 is not possible, which is scary as hell, terrifying. You know what I mean? Not only as the people living in this area, but also as storm chasers, because you're just, it's just a really scary situation. And now where I popped that sounding was this cell right here going across the Missouri line into Illinois at 5 p.m. That 5 p.m. range, in this line right here, you're going to start to see that. Now the next hour that it goes through, when we get into the 5 to 7 o'clock range, these cells are going to be merging into a squall line of storms. So you're going to see all these cells kind of merge into a big line, and then what you have is a bigger problem, because then you have embedded cells in this line right here. You're not going to be able to see these. You're not going to be able to identify them. There's nothing that you can do to predict or even anticipate what is in this line, because it's all going to be hidden. All this yellow and blue fuzzy stuff around it, that's all heavy, heavy rain. So that means that pretty much every storm in here is going to be severely rain-wrapped, probably featuring hail in the middle of it. So damaging and possibly hail that can cause injuries, is going to be existent and apparent in that storm as well. Now where it goes down into these narrow lines right here, this is where you're going to have these little tight knit cells in here, and that's when you're going to get soundings off of storms like that, off of the southwest region of that line, where it starts to get really, really tight and narrow. Then you're going to see these little embedded cells in here, and these could be little isolated embedded tornadoes that are in that line, hidden in there, just pumping out a whole lot of damage and a whole lot of scary, scary stuff. Now I just went a little bit further southwest and clicked the sounding again, and this is what I got. Another PDS Tor sounding with a basically textbook standard perfect HODO right here. You can see our helicity limits here, 8.9, 8.8 on effective inflow. 7 to 8 range, significant tornado parameters. When the CIN and the fix and significant tornado parameter right here, when they are kind of consistent with each other and they're close in range to each other, you know what I mean? That just kind of tells me how organized these storms are going to really be, you know what I mean? Because sometimes you'll get, staggeringly high CIN and really low fix, or vice versa, you know what I mean? And it's really kind of inconsistent. And you can see that there might be a little bit of power challenges between storms going on, and some might be suffocating the others or whatnot, and there's some limiting factors in here, but not today. There's zero limiting factors with any kind of tornado genesis with these storms at all. These are the most favorable soundings for massive, big, fat, long track, possibly tornadoes that I've seen in a long, long time. I tell you. I mean, we're talking about, 2010 was rough. 2013 was rough. There was a couple of years in there, you know what I mean, in the early 2000s there, where it was really, really rough. They had a couple bad years with tornadoes. You know what I mean? But these soundings, they're starting to look worse than anything that we had seen as far as forecast data, you know what I mean, that, even in 2010 or 2013. In most of those cases, when the soundings looked bad back then and the forecasts looked bad, yeah, cool, we probably could have tornadoes. It didn't look as likely as this, you know what I mean, where it didn't look as bad, but then we ended up getting horrible tornadoes out of it. You know what I mean? This is a different situation where the soundings look terrible, and you could possibly get terrible tornadoes out of it. This is definitely not a day to skimp on the warnings. That's really what I need to tell you guys. Anybody that's living in the Missouri region, in the Illinois region, in the Ohio Valley, even into Kentucky, Tennessee, if you get a severe thunderstorm warning, you need to be in a shelter. Because on a day like this, that severe thunderstorm warning could last literally 45 seconds before going tornado warned. I mean, and I'm talking about that real time, real talk, that severe thunderstorm warning could be, anywhere from 45 seconds to 3 minutes. You know what I mean? Or longer, depending on what's going on with the storm, but the chance of it, going to like 45 seconds before going tornado warned, it's a much higher risk of that happening today. So that's why I'm telling everybody, if you get a severe thunderstorm warning, get into a shelter. Don't stand by it. Don't keep the door open. Just get into it and just wait for the storm to pass. Because these things are going to be so massively unpredictable today. You have no idea what they're going to do. You have no idea where they're at. You have no idea how strong they are. And the damaging winds alone, even without a tornado today, when these storms arrive, especially with this storm structure the way it is, anytime that you get kind of this bowing back to the southwest, you know what I mean? Then you're going to have massive inflow winds coming in from the southeast that are going to be kind of merging into that storm, as well as the westerlies as it passes to the east. You know what I mean? You could have all kinds of winds going different directions at different altitudes in the atmosphere, and they all could do all kinds of funky damage. You know what I mean? Talking about bringing trees down after the ground is massively saturated, which is very common in the southern states, and even in the states like, Missouri and things like that, because especially, Missouri is a very humid state alone as it is. You know what I mean? So, you could have massive trees coming down, being pulled out of their roots, which can damage houses, it can damage vehicles, it can injure people. All kinds of tragedies could happen. Telephone poles. You could have a lot of fire problems from live wires. Any of that stuff. This is kind of a nightmare setup today. All right, so going into the 7, 8 o'clock hour here, and you can just see it just kind of keeps going. You know what I mean? These cells off to the southwest right here in the southwest region of that line of storms, that's really the ones that you got to worry about, because these are going to be the big beefy storms. But in this line here going across to Illinois, there's all kinds of inflow notching in this as well. The winds are really just pumping into it. So even though the tornado risk is a little bit lower, it isn't zero at all. So like I said, you can have little embedded tornadoes periodically showing up in this line where they'll drop, then they'll recede, try to rebuild again, drop, because there's that constant merging and that constant reorganization going on. All right, that's what you're going to see in this line of storms, in this northern line of storms going across to Illinois. Okay, these big cells off to the southwest are going to be a different story. You can see this region right here, just 3 little dots in the middle of it. These purple dots, that could be 3 different consecutive isolated mesocyclones that are embedded in that little blob right here. That's kind of what that looks like to me. Now if we pop that just to the east, then you see like basically the worst freaking sounding that you've ever seen. Where you're getting effectively your STP up at 9. Look at this. The effective inflows at 9.2. Our surface helicity at 3 kilometer, 9.3. Surface 1 kilometer, 7.8. This is some of the highest helicity indices that I've ever seen. I've never seen this reach this high. I've seen it reach the 6 to 7 range before, sure, but never 8 to 9. I've never seen that before. That's crazy. I mean, I'm sure that there's other, weather forecasters and people who work with this every day. I don't work with it every day, but I've been doing this for years, and I haven't really seen indices that high. The supercell development, I have seen this high. You know what I mean? I have seen it in the 30s before. This is so staggeringly high that rotation is just super, super easy today. Alright, significant tornado parameters up at 8.8. Now That's just kind of a nightmare situation. Then look at our ship here at 2.6. This is what I was talking about with some of these stores being able to drop gorilla hail. You could see some gorilla hail with these big fat, hail that could do a lot of damage and a lot of injuries, a lot of bad stuff. All right, so and our lapse rate's at 7. I mean, that's pretty common, the 7-point range for severe storms with the lapse rates. It just kind of tells you exactly how unstable the atmosphere really is. There's so much instability that's going on here, and it seems to be carrying with the storms, which sometimes the instability remains stagnant and then finally dissipates and recedes as the storm moves east. Doesn't look like that's kind of, the day that we're having. It seems like the instability is actually traveling with the line of storms for a little bit before it starts to dissipate once it gets into maybe some cooler and drier conditions and environments. All right, so as we're gonna travel kind of downward, southwest, downward down that line. All right, so we checked out this kind of northern portion here. You got this storm cell right here that's actually looking pretty standard textbook for a tornadic structure, and then we get another pretty bad sounding off of that. All right, so 5 in the 5 range, significant tornado parameters, 5 to 6 on our helicity and inflow. Still a pretty beefy sounding for a storm that could produce a pretty decent sized tornado. All right, another PDS tor situation off of that. It just keeps going down the line. All of these cells, they're gonna be massively supportive of tornadoes. Now let's go into the later portions of the day. 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. So the daytime heating should be starting to recede a little bit. It's going to hang around, especially through those evening hours. That daytime heating is going to contribute to a lot of the instability that you're going to have throughout the day. So it's going to contribute to the extreme storms. So, because I'm sure that at some point throughout the day, you got breaks in the clouds, sun's shining through, it's a nice day, it looks beautiful before these storms show up. But that daytime heating contributes to the instability, and then these storms run in, and everything is already pretty much laid out for them. It's just easy for them to develop. And that's kind of what we're seeing here. Now this northern portion should be starting to kind of taper down in its severity. Yeah, so you can start to see it tapering down in its severity a little bit. It's still pretty high. It's still potential of some tornado development in here, but it's a little bit more limited. It's starting to cool down. It's starting to taper off. That's this northern portion going through Indiana. Now we're going to look at the southwestern portion of it that's still in Missouri and going all the way leading down into Arkansas. Let's take a look a little bit further east. So it is coming down, but on the southwestern line, we still got some big beefy storms still trying to produce, and that's what we're going to kind of keep seeing here. You see another inflow notch right here, which you could have a tornado right in this little blob right here. So let me see. See, that's pretty high right there. So what you're seeing, where I saw that inflow notch, you're still getting helicity and inflow at 7-point range. Still 9.1 on the significant tornado parameter. So what you're having right here is this inflow notch, and then you get this little dot right here, but this little dot could be an active, in this sounding anyways, it could be an active tornado that's going to produce and end up on the ground. Now usually these models are not 100% accurate, but the high resolution model is pretty close. So it might not exactly roll out this way, but it's gonna be close. And that's probably the possibility here, especially when you see these structures in the forecast data showing inflow notching as well as potentially actively tornado producing storms like that. Anywhere we hit this, these soundings are saying, yep, this is a tornado. And that's kind of the case here. These further southwest cells still producing massive amounts of supercell tornado development. A lot of really decent structure. I mean, this is just kind of one of the worst setups that I've seen in a very long time. All right, so you're starting to see a little bit of weakening in it, but it's still not there now. Further all the way down to the southwest, you got more cells. That's all the way down in Arkansas that are able to produce tornadoes as well. So northern Arkansas, mid to northern Arkansas, watch out. Coming to the later evening hours. I mean, you guys, everybody in this region, Missouri, Illinois, Arkansas, Tennessee, Kentucky, you guys should be ready for this by noon. By noon, you should be prepared. Have your shelters packed with resources that you might need, water, food, have a sturdy pair of shoes, even something to protect your head is not a bad idea as well. Because you could have things flying around, especially with the wind and everything like that. You never know. And knock on wood, God forbid, you are in a tornado and you're in your shelter. Just remember, you have to crawl out of there and you got to walk out of there. So make sure that you have something on your feet, because there's going to be broken glass, there's going to be nails, there's going to be things that you can get into your feet that can mess you up. So definitely be prepared. You should be starting to prepare your shelters and everything like that by noon. Because about noon, this is when these storms are going to start showing their faces. They're going to start organizing. You're going to start to see the ugliness start to begin here. Please, for the love of all things holy, don't be trying to film today. You know what I mean? Because usually I know that people like to try to film storms and everything like that. This is not a day to do it. This is probably one of the worst days to go and try to do it. Because this is going to be so hard to anticipate for storm chasers, weather professionals, law enforcement, and emergency services. This is going to be so hard to anticipate and predict, and for them to deal with. The last thing that they need is somebody willingly putting themselves in danger blindly because they want to film storms. This is probably one of the worst days to do it, because you're not going to see these storms. Many of them are going to be very, very extremely rain-wrapped, and then the rest of them that are going to come are going to be in the dark hours, of the evening when it starts to get dark. And so this is definitely not a day to go and chase tornadoes if you do not know what you're doing. You know what I mean? Trust the professionals on this one. I'm telling you, this is a life-threatening day. That's basically what I can sum it up to. That's why I had to do this forecast, because this is a life-threatening day. You know what I mean? If you are not careful today and do not heed the warnings and what your local weather professionals say, this storm could kill you. So, very, very scary day. Alright, well, if any other updates come up, I will do another forecast. I'll do another forecast later on the weather setup for tomorrow. It doesn't look as bad as today, but we still have about 12 hours, so things could change in one day, 24 hours, things can change. Alright, so knocking on wood as much as I can. Everybody's going to survive the night, and everybody's going to be okay. Please adhere to the weather warnings, and I hope everybody remains safe. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.